Welcome to the InfoWars Nightly News. I'm David Knight. It's Monday, April 29th, 2013. Now tonight we've got an amazing interview with Sibel Edmonds, and she's going to talk about CIA connections to the Boston Marathon bombing. But first, we have a public service announcement for you from InfoWars and the U.S. government.
He did what we all must learn to do. You and you and you and you. Duck and cover.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover.
Suspect 1 is dead. Suspect 2 is on the run. We're asking people to shelter in place. In other words, to stay indoors with their doors locked and not to open the door for anyone other than a properly identified law enforcement officer.
This is an official civil defense film produced in cooperation with the Federal Civil Defense Administration and in consultation with the Safety Commission of the National Education Association.
Well, that's a pretty old film, isn't it? But some things just don't change. You know, whether it's a nuclear holocaust or one untrained 19-year-old unarmed on the loose in Boston, you can always count on your government to keep you safe. You can go to sleep now. Everything is just fine. You've got that sense of security that the government gives you. You know, when they had the first duck and cover drills, I was a child in elementary school, and the Cuban Missile Crisis was coming up, and they were telling us that we weren't going to have enough time to get back to our house if nuclear war broke out. So we needed to duck and cover. We needed to make sure that we put our head inside of our metal desk chairs. And even as an elementary school student, that didn't make any sense to me. Later on, I thought, why were they even telling us that? Were they trying to preserve some fragment of dental records in case of a nuclear holocaust? I don't know, but it's absolutely insane. And so is the idea that the government is going to protect you with a lockdown. Did you catch that? He said, don't open your door for anybody except the government. That's right, the government who's going to come to your door with fully automatic weapons aimed at your head, demanding that you let them in and that you come out with those guns pointed at you. It's absolutely insane. But of course, looking at that duck and cover drill, it was also brought to you by the NEA, the National Education Association. That's right, the government schools, the same people that are training our children to go through all kinds of metal detectors and scans and police state treatment, and you guessed it, lockdown in school. That's where it's headed. Well, the word actually is getting out, though, to Americans that maybe things aren't exactly as they say the government, as the government is saying they are. Multiple polls have said that Americans are more afraid of the government than they are of terrorists, even. So we see that even though in the wake of 9/11, the interesting thing about this is the way we see this trending. Just before 9/11, more people felt that they did not want to give up their liberty for more intrusions on their security, and that was about 40% to 33%. But what happened immediately after 9/11, we see that flipped dramatically to 71% agreeing that they would sacrifice personal freedom to reduce the threat of terrorism. And that kind of held for several years, up to about 2006. Then the numbers began to fall. And interestingly enough, this most recent poll was taken the day after the Boston bombing, and there was a slight advantage. It was 48% to 41% said that they would not give up their liberties for freedom. That's kind of interesting to see that start to change, and I think part of that is that people are understanding not only that the government is unable to provide that kind of security, but also understanding the whole concept of false flag and seeing how the government is creating a lot of these threats that they're trying to scare us with. Another thing that's interesting is how that breaks down by political affiliation. In that Fox News poll, they found that 51% of Democrats were willing to throw away their freedoms for the promise of security. Roughly half of the Republicans, 47%, but the ones who were really hanging in there, the ones who weren't buying the government line, were also the ones who weren't buying this party line, this false dichotomy of left and right, Republican and Democrat. Those people, only 29% of them were willing to trade their liberties for the promise of security. Now, as we see things developing in the Boston Marathon bombing narrative, as we see the government constantly changing its story and coming up with another story that contradicts the previous one, one thing that's kind of hanging in there is this whole idea of a lone wolf terrorist that is radicalized by some lone wolf radicalizer. And I don't know. I mean, are really that many people falling for that? George Bush even seems to have some questions with that narrative. Let's take a look at this.
Terrorism in Boston.
Yeah.
Many people have wondered if it took you right back to 9/11 when you heard it.
Well, at first, you know, I was deeply concerned that there might have been a organized plot. I don't know all the facts. I don't think we all know all the facts, but I was deeply concerned that this could have been, you know, another organized, highly organized attack on the country.
Did you catch that? Another he stopped it right there. Another conspiracy theory, maybe. Is he talking about another one like 9/11? That was, after all, the context. She said, you know, when you think about this, does this bring back any memories of 9/11? And one of the things he says is, it might be another conspiracy, another organized attack. Well, the mysterious Misha is this guy who would not only radicalize the brothers, but evidently he provided these guys who were on welfare, he provided them with brand new sports cars. That doesn't really seem to be what we expect from someone who is a radical Islamic hyper-religious terrorist, that they would be providing him with sports cars. But now we have the mainstream media trying to sell us that narrative, and we have a reporter go to the home of a man named Ala Verdov in his home in Rhode Island. It's a lower middle class neighborhood where he lives in a modest, tidy apartment with his elderly parents, and yet we're supposed to believe that this guy not only radicalized them, but provided them with things like sports cars, and that they were radicalized even though they were living a very westernized lifestyle. Now this guy, Misha, they're trying to sell us that Misha is Alek Verdov, he said he never met the Tsarnaev family. He said he's never met them, and yet the mainstream media is trying to sell this narrative that he is the person who changed them. We do know, however, that Tsarnaev is connected to the Caucus Fund and the Jamestown Foundation. Those both have CIA connections. And they also have connections to people like Zbigniew Brzezinski. And we've got an interview coming up, and I want you to stick around for that, because someone whose expertise is in this area of the world, Sibel Edmonds. She worked as a translator for the FBI, and she knows that area very well. She knows what was happening in the 90s, and she has uncovered and is showing us CIA connections that are far more damning than just these connections to the Caucus Fund and the Jamestown Foundation. So stick around. Right after the news, we're going to have that interview with Sibel. Now, speaking of hidden motives, we see that the more illegal immigrants go on food stamps, the more J.P. Morgan is enriched. That's right. They made about $560 million processing electronic benefits transfer cards for people on food stamps. They get between 31 cents and $2.30 for every single person on food stamp. And it has become something that the U.S. Department of Agriculture is actually selling. They're providing the Mexican government with literature that actively encourages illegal immigrants to enroll in food stamps. One flyer contains the following message in Spanish, and this is being supplied to the Mexican government to give out to Mexican citizens. And it says in Spanish, "You need not divulge information regarding your immigration status in seeking this benefit for your children." And that phrase is bold-faced in the flyer, so they make sure that they see that. Over and over again, we see a pattern in both the welfare state and the warfare state of fostering, in the welfare state, a dependency, and in the warfare state, fostering insecurity. And we also see another pattern, and that is large corporations like J.P. Morgan, large corporations like the military-industrial complex and General Electric, the owner of MSNBC, profit from the warfare state and the welfare state. And this is just the latest example of that.
Visit Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. When you're on the site, you can also tune in 24 hours a day to my daily radio broadcast. There's also a free iPhone app to listen to the syndicated radio show when and where you want.